Hey guys, it's Sebastian back with another video, and today we're going to talk about something that a lot of artists and philosophers have kind of talked about and engaged with in the past, and that's how to think like a child, right? Or why that's so difficult to do. And so some of the greatest artists will tell you things like, trying to be in that childlike flow state, trying to be in that childlike state can be very challenging. Like, it's one thing to master something, but to draw like a child or to do art like a child is very difficult. To have childlike mannerisms is very difficult. And I do believe that I have the reason why that is. And that is because this concept of thinking like a child is actually a paradox. And the way that it becomes a paradox is if you understand the way children develop, right, into adults. And so the way I view child development and the way I use what would happen with the process is that we start out with our gut, which is our feelings, and then we move on to desire. And so really children are just feelings and desires, and they're not using their thinking in the same way that an adult does. So they don't have the same stress components that a adult would have by the time they're done with their adolescence. So in order to think like a child, you literally can't think. And that's what's the thing is like, in order to not have, conscious state, you have to turn it off, right? And that's very hard to do as an adult, is to turn off your conscious state, right? This is kind of similar to the idea of like Adam and Eve, like, and biting the apple, is that before they bit the apple, there was some sense of autopilot, right? They're just kind of going with the flow, but they're not really having free conscious state, which is similar to kids. Kids are very good with going with the flow, but they have a hard time focusing. They have a hard time using their consciousness to concentrate, right? They don't know how to concentrate outside of like something that's just a desire for them. So if they're really into it, they really are feeling it, they can sit there for a while. But if they have to think about it, it's very hard for them to get involved or, build that type of like energy towards completing that task, because they're not really having the same drive that they did, with their feelings, or calling it, if they're craving it. Because when you're craving something, you're willing to put in that energy because it's a craving, right? Versus like focusing on something because you need to, because you're stressed out. And so kids use cravings as a mechanism, that craving or that desire, to mechanize themselves to do something, versus adults where we can use stress as an energy source to push us to complete something. And so again, kids can't focus as well because they lack that energy source called stress that adults use to help them complete their task. So this idea that children, think, well, that's why you wouldn't be able to do that. Even, for example, I have this part of my modality where I talk about the intake of alcohol. And a lot of times when people start to drink and they sit down and start kind of really getting into the drinking, they will deactivate their adult brain. They deactivate their prefrontal cortex. And in this process of deactivating yourself, well, you're just allowing those emotional charges to come up. So these feelings are going to start affecting you. Why? Because you're turning off your thinking brain. So the feeling brain starts to activate. It starts to react, right? And so we want to kind of understand that mechanism, so that when we understand, when we're trying to think like a child, really children aren't thinkers. They're feelers. And that's why they go with the flow, because feelings are kind of like a flow state. You can't deactivate them. A lot of times you have to just kind of let them go through the process. So like go through their flow and be able to regulate after that flow state's kind of calm down, like a water rushing through. It needs to just rush through, and then it'll kind of level out as it comes out. And so, yeah, feelings are the same way for children. They just got to let them out, process, and then when they calm down, then we can kind of intervene with thoughts and kind of help them regulate. Now, this also affects creativity, and let's talk about a little bit of what I was talking about earlier about Adam and Eve and kind of like how the apple plays a part. So prior to the apple, right, they were like, again, ignorance is bliss. They were ignorant. They didn't understand the truth. They didn't understand knowledge. And the reason why the snake, or the devil in this case, had them bite the apple, right, is because when you have consciousness, you also have to be aware that there is evil and bad things in the world. So prior to that apple, you didn't have consciousness to know that there are bad things going on, right? There is a lot of bad people out there. Now, kids have a vibe. Like, they can kind of pick up, like, that person makes me feel weird. I don't like them. And kids are good about picking up on vibes, right? But when you're conscious, you have to be aware that those vibes are actually real things. That weird feeling that you had is very likely something protecting you, right? Something's going on with this person, and you're actually reading the room is what's going on. And when you turn off feelings, you turn off consciousness, you don't have that same awareness. And so really the idea of this apple is that prior to having apple, you really didn't have, free will. You were in an autopilot type of way, but you didn't have the ability to like understand the sense of direction that you were going, or to make choices, to really be able to choose things for yourself. Now, how does this play in other parts of our life? Well, let's talk about something called creativity. And creativity is actually made up of two different things. The first thing you need to have creativity is imagination. Imagination is like water that flows out, right? The problem with water, though, if you put a barrier, it's going to start pushing over it, and it's going to eventually come out, right? So that pressure from that water is going to build up and flow over. And so children are the same way. When children are in flow state, just like water, you want to keep providing that water a path, right? So as long as you have a path, the water will flow. Because kids, again, are just in a flow state. They'll go over here for a bit, then they'll go over here for a bit. They're just kind of going with whatever their desires or whatever their cravings are kind of taking them. They're kind of going in the moment with the moment, right? So that's how kids interact when it comes to this flow state. Now, what adults can do that kids can is adults have focus, right? So they have the ability to focus on something, put their energy into something. It's the same thing as if you had a hose with water flowing out, but then if you put pressure on that hose, that water starts to spray out, right? It starts to come out a very specific way. So you can take this idea of imagination, right? This flow state, apply pressure to it and focus, and then we'll actually start shooting out in a very specific way. So you can put that pressure to make it do what you want to, right? Make it focus on a specific area. Now, if you don't have focus, like if you have a lot of imagination but not enough focus, then you can't create, right? You're too much in the head and the clouds, and nothing's actually showing of it. And if you're somebody that has a lot of focus but no flow, no imagination, then it's going to be very hard for you to create as well, because you're not going to have that state of mind where it's flowing through you to let something be created. So feelings are very important, because feelings are a part of the flow. Like I said, feelings flow through you, right? So if you're not feeling it, you're not going to have any kind of imagination, right? Because imagination is a combination of feeling the world in a unique way. So you're able to really feel what's happening. And then your focus, right? If you don't have that discipline, then again, nothing's going to get done. So you have to be able to have that stress component, at least enough to put pressure for something to come out of this. So you need the feelings to be engaged, so you can have some kind of creative, like some kind of imaginative flow. And you need your mind, your consciousness to be engaged, so that you can put the pressure to actually have creativity. So in order to have creativity, you need both. And if you want to create like a child, then you just have to let go of focus and let the flow state take over. I literally flow with whatever your craving is. So you go with your craving. But if you feel like you're not getting a lot done by doing that, that's because the intention was never to get things done as a child. It was to exist in the moment for the maximum ability of doing that. Literally just allowing yourself to flow through your emotions and just let them guide you. Almost like, I feel like it's like you have a boat and it's on water, and when you want to focus, you have to blow the sails in a certain direction, right? So you put that energy, but without the water, your boat's not going anywhere. So you need both of them to work together. And so that's how creativity plays into how to think like a child, all right, guys? So we need to feel and we need to focus if we want to be able to create. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy. Bye. Hey guys, it's Sebastian back with another video, and today I want to talk to you guys about limits, boundaries, assertive communication, and some other things that are important for how to integrate people into a life where you're doing well in your development. Let me break it down for you guys why this is important. So I have 3 stages of development that people go through when they're doing therapy with me. The first stage is to build value of themselves. So the goal is to figure out what you want from the world and who you are. So you want to have a baseline of what sense of direction you have, your goals, like who you are as a person, your passions, hobbies, like literally everything about you, like your foundation is this first step. Like that is the most important thing to build value. The second thing you're going to do is build boundaries, assertive communication, limits. So first you have to value the person, and then you have to value the person in regards to others. So first it's me, and then me versus others. So there's a process that has to play out. The third part is going to be where you can go to like large groups, large events, and not feel impacted. But the first part is you got to work on yourself. So working on yourself allows you to then be able to communicate as effective as necessary your limits and boundaries to the people around you. When you don't work on yourself, it leaves you susceptible to other people's feedback because you personally are not handling or taking care of your own responsibilities, leaving you open to other people's feedback, other people's commentary. And so it's really important that you work on yourself. Step 1, find your value. Who are you? Who do you represent yourself as? The better that you understand who you are as an individual, the easier it is to be accountable or put limits with those around you, especially when you're making new acquaintances, friends, people, where you're trying to figure out that boundary limit. It's going to be really important for you to establish healthy boundaries while being able to, use your value and kind of put it and pin it against the value of others so that you can get the most out of your time. So, how do we integrate others into our life? Well, first, we want to develop our own schedule, our own routines, really have a good understanding of what your life cycle is going to look like. Because the reason you want to do this is you want to be able to sustain who you are as a person. When you have a good regimen, right? When you're doing things well, let's think about what happens. People recognize you. They see the efforts that you're putting in. They understand that you've been, consistent at doing what you're doing. You build trust. All these factors play a significant role in the way you engage with other people. Like I said prior, when you have a good sense of self, this boundary is what's going to allow you to get more from your relationships. And so having a sense of self gives you the ability to say, hey, look, I got these things going on. This is important to me. The reason why this person's even coming into your relationship is because they are seeing something of value within you. And that sense of value is something you created from the first day because you actively were working on who you are. And when you work on who you are, people can understand who you want to be, and then they can interact with you in a way that's healthy so that everyone gets more from the relationship. So it's important to really stand up for who you are so that the people that engage with you are already in a better place the way they engage with you compared to if you didn't know who you were. When you lack confidence, you're more willing to give in to people's commentary, you're more willing to fold for others, and you start to lose your sense of value the more that you fold for others. How can you sustain yourself? How can you sustain an identity if you don't work on that identity? And then when people try to interact with you, you start changing for them. Then how can they be comfortable with you knowing that you aren't even that person that you say you are? And so the lack of self-respect, the lack of consistency from one's own inabilities is the key that people will use to show you're not really who you say you are. So this mechanism is super important for you to have quality relationships. So number 1, if you want to be able to integrate people into your life, is you have to know who you are. You have to really hone in on your belief system that this is where I am and this is who I plan to continue being, right? Because this is fundamentally, at my core, the most organic version of myself, right? Is who I am when I work on myself and when I continue to do things that bring me passion, consistency in this life. So step one, stick to your boundaries, stick to your limits, know who you are. The second step is, how do I integrate the people into my schedule? So one thing that I see people do is they start modifying their current schedule, their current routine, so they can integrate people into them. But the problem with integrating people into your schedule, or trying to change your schedule, sorry, not integrate, you're trying to change your schedule to meet that person's needs, right? The problem when you start changing your schedule is it takes away from the thing that was creating value in your life in the first place. So if you start hanging out with somebody and you have, like, you know, even if it's a romantic interest, and you start folding your days, changing your nights on a whim to go see this person, the thing that brought you value in the first place is going to start to go down. You have to be able to sustain your value through the continuation of your self-respect. So continuing your personal development is going to be number one. Number two is, how do I communicate with this person? Well, instead of changing your plans to adjust to this person, you're going to encourage them to make plans with you for the future. Hey, how about this? You want me to come over? Let me come over on Thursday. I'll come over on Thursday and I'll bring this over. So instead of saying, no, I can't, I got to do this, instead of making up a bunch of excuses of why I can't, I'm going to give them the solution. I'm going to give them the thing that we can work towards so that we can develop that consistency, right? So it's like, hey, look, I'll see you this day, or we're going to do this. So I'm including them into my schedule, but I'm not changing my schedule for this person. This helps both of us keep a sense of respect from both sides. Like, hey, I feel that this person's acknowledging my needs, as far as, like, at all respecting my needs. So by me having things already in place, it gives them an opportunity to say, oh, well, he always does that. He's always in that mode. So you want to be able to help these people understand that you're not going to change your schedule, and your schedule is so important that you're willing to add them to your days. And that's the best you're going to get out of people, is by adding them to what that already sustained thing is. So that way, also, what I recommend is, if you already have a scheduled event, go do it, regardless of the other person. Keep going doing the things that you find passionate. The last thing I think is important for people to know about integrating people in their life is obviously the communication style. If you come from a defensive place and say, well, this is why, this is the thing, it's actually this. When you come in with those defensive comments, when you come in with that negative reactivity, it really causes people to react. It causes people to overthink what you're saying because you're talking from a negative perspective. So what I recommend people do is try to be more positive with communication. Instead of saying no, just skip to what? This is what we're going to work on. This is what we're going to do. And try really hard to work on your responses to people, because depending on how you respond to people is going to change how they respond to you. So talking, responses, all very important mechanisms. Let's do a quick review. So we want to take care of our gut and our child brain to have that discipline so that we can find who we are, have a personality. And when we have that personality, we don't want to lose it. So we have to keep continuing going through with our emotions, and try to your best to keep that assertiveness and include people into your future plans. And that's the best you guys are going to do for now. All right, guys, we'll see you guys in the next one. Later. Take it easy. Bye. Hey, guys, it's Sebastian back with another video. And today I'm going to be talking about parenting, a little bit of insight on really what parents' role is, and understanding where parents are really messing up. Also, let's be honest here. The system as a macro, when you really look at, like, the government, and you look at, like, religious institutions and these major power components, you'll start to notice that they definitely hinder the development of children. There was even a study done where they wanted to assess like what makes a child a genius, or like what makes geniuses. And they did a study and they saw that like somewhere like 90% of the kids they were studying were testing like genius status by like 4 years old. But then those same kids by the end of high school, less than like 3% of them were testing. And so there's a lot of factors obviously involved in this process of what makes, children successful, what makes people successful. But the reality is that there's a broken system right now. A lot of people are suffering as a result of it. Being a therapist, being somebody that works in mental health, I worked with a variety of people, all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different situations. And one thing I can tell you commonly is the majority of people that have some sort of issue, whether, whatever mental health issues they're dealing with, I would say more than 90% of them, probably 98% of them really, are because of family. It's the family that's messing people up. It's the family dynamics that are destroying people's ability to cope with life. Now, being someone's also a spiritual person and being able to see how the different parts of our development impact the overall consistency that we have when we become adults, you start to see some patterns start to play out. And through my years of being a therapist and my background in child development, I have a lot of insight on the stages of development, the impact that trauma can have on children and into adulthood. And then you start seeing some very specific things that start to help you understand what causes these deficits and also what the role of a parent really is. And so let's start kind of from the beginning. The first milestone that I would say, the first thing that people experience from birth is feelings. We are born feeling. We literally are crying when we first come out. We are feeling the world. We are hungry. We are cold. We are tired. We want to explore. We feel around. We have some sort of craving for things. And again, cravings, as I've explained in the past, you don't pick cravings. They just happen to you. And so kids are born feeling. They're literally touching everything they can. They're putting everything in their mouth. They want to look at everything. They're literally just in a feeling mode. And as they get, through 0 to 5, as they're getting older, they're feeling that entire time. So really the role of a parent at that point is not to tell children what they're supposed to feel. It's to guide children on how to manage those feelings. A lot of parents, you'll see them trying to be like, you should feel this, you should feel that, you shouldn't feel that, you shouldn't feel this. And I know sometimes parents do it out of they want to be good, they're trying to be right, they're trying to help the child understand, but they're not helping the child understand because they're inflicting actually more pain on the child by telling them your feeling is invalid. When really the job of the parent at that stage is to help the child navigate these feelings, how to manage these feelings, what to do about these buildups, what to do when they are experiencing this reaction to stimulation. So children, when they're in their feeling brain, really need to be supported in how to navigate those feelings, right? Hey, you're tired? Hey, I get tired too. What I do is I take a nap. I go lay down for a little bit. Oh, you're a little angry right now? I get angry too sometimes. When I get angry, I like to go listen to music. It helps me feel better when I listen to music. So really, your job is to help navigate children through these emotional deficits. And so the role of a parent isn't to tell the child what they're supposed to be experiencing. It's to help the child guide through the process of what they're experiencing. Another thing that you'll see affects the next stage, right? It would be from 6 to 11. And this is your personality, your individuality, really who you are. So you're working on your individuality during this phase. And so, again, parents don't need to tell children who they are. They're automatically going to tell you who they are. I like this. I like that. Kids naturally have interest. They naturally have desires. They're going to want to do things on their own. They're going to like certain types of dancing, music, animals, like everything is going to be their way. They don't have to be told to activate themselves. They're going to tell you who they are. So again, the role of a parent is not to tell a child who they're supposed to be. It's to help a child become who they're meant to be. And so you're guiding a kid through these large emotional experiences so that they can become the best version of themselves. So again, parents, I find, will sit there telling their kid, you should like this, you should do this, you're going to do this. And they're really projecting onto the child their own belief system and biases, which again confuses the child, because then they're not feeling like the things that they enjoy or who they are is important, right? So they start to dilute who they are, which leaves deficits in their confidence, right? So really the role of a parent, again, guide. Feelings guiding, your individuality, you're being guided, or your confidence, you could say, you're being guided. And the other thing that you'll see, the other part of it is the last stage, which is stress, right? Everybody's going to deal with a certain degree of stress as they age, right? Because you just naturally start to stress out. Things that you didn't worry about before, you will eventually start to worry about, because your brain has the capacity to actually worry about these things now. And so when we go from that perspective, that we know that, hey, like, kids will stress, when parents tell you should stress about this, you should think, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? Kids don't need to be told what if this happens, because they're going to start feeling those what if this happens on their own. What they do need, though, is, again, that same mechanism we talked about before. They need guidance. They need to be provided some mechanism to understand the process that they're experiencing, right? So they're having some sort of issue, deficit, and what they really need is guidance on how to manage these stressful components, like how to manage these issues that come up, like how do I handle this and what do I do about this? Kids' stress will also develop over time, 12 being friends, 16 being future, and 20 being their independence. So wherever they're at, they're naturally going to start to worry. They're naturally going to start to want to be more independent. It's like getting mad at a fruit that hasn't necessarily completely ripened yet. And so what you want to do is meet children where they're at throughout their development. And a thing that really take away from this too is looking back at your own life and seeing how your parents raised you. Did they tell you how to feel, or did they guide you how to alleviate these feelings? Did they tell you who you were, or did they guide you in becoming the best version of yourself, right? Did they tell you what to stress about, or did they help guide you managing those stressful reactions, those stressful moments? And so really at the end of it, what we really need to know is people haven't been educating and guiding their children appropriately, which is why you see such a huge amount of trauma in this world, a huge amount of issues. And not only that, you have a system that perpetuates these belief systems. You have people in power who want you to keep, putting pressure on your children, because you're essentially conditioning them for the way the government, quote unquote, the people in power, people in religious, whatever, cults, as I would say, the way they put pressure on kids is reflective on what they want as far as people being submissive. So when we guide children on how to, work through their feelings, their confidence, and their stress, then they become more fulfilling people in the end. So just remember, guys, if you don't know how to manage your feelings, you don't know how to manage who you are, and you don't know how to manage your stress, it's because you weren't educated and taught, but that doesn't mean you can't change the system now. So just be aware, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy. Bye. Hey guys, Sebastian back with another video, and today I want to talk to you guys about this idea that I have of where our system is as far as like spirituality and mental health, and some of the problems that you see come up, especially as we learn to separate these two philosophies when really they're much more ingrained with each other than people understand. But we really live in a world right now where science and spirituality have been separated to some extent. And this has caused, like, I think, ripple effects overall as we've continued living. What this has done is essentially separated what I would consider like the kind of more factual side of the human experience versus more of the emotional, spiritual side of the human experience. So there's parts of us that, again, there are like statistics that can help us understand, especially things that are more common than not. It just gives us a way to kind of have some kind of base. But the other side of it is that it doesn't explain a lot of the metaphysical stuff. It doesn't explain a lot of the human experiences. And so, on one hand, it's good to have stats and numbers, but it's also good to understand, like, the deeper meaning, like the deeper purpose. Like, I'll give you some examples of things that I see separate humans from other animals. We have this fascination with things that are, like, exact. I think that the best quote I can think of is Gandalf, where he said, a wizard is never late or never early, they're always just on time, right? And so the reason why I say that specific quote is because there's, like, all these, like, different compilation videos, all these different things where things are just done exactly. Or, for example, if you get to the bus stop and you happen to get there right when the bus is showing up, you feel like it was, like, meant for you. Like, you feel like you got there at the perfect time. Really what that tells me, and what you'll see, is that human beings really do like having things happen in the moment, like things that perfectly fit, while other animals don't necessarily have that same response to these moments, these, like, mini miracles, you'd call them, or these mini, like, perfect situations. And so there's these things that happen to human beings that separate us from other animals. And again, it's just the way we experience life in comparison to other things. The way we experience grief, the way we experience memories, the way we experience stress mechanisms. There's a lot of things that we experience that are different from the way other animals experience these things. And that's why it's needed to have that sense of spirituality, or that sense of understanding, to understand the human experience, to understand what's going on with us that separates us from other things. So my side, when it comes to psychology is great for understanding, again, statistics. I mean, even the manual that's used is based in statistics. It's literally a manual. And the manual itself gives us a good basis of, if we see a pattern of behaviors, to be able to cluster them and label them and put them together in some sort of, like, grouping that gives us a way to, like, connect, certain behaviors, certain people's experiences to other people in a collective, overall, right? So again, numbers can be very effective, very helpful. But what's missing too in that is to understand the human experience, as far as, like, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be somebody with feelings, somebody with thoughts? What do these things do for us? How is everything connected, right? How are all these different parts of us one? So spirituality looks for oneness, while psychology looks for separation, right? So we're looking at what makes us different, and we're saying, okay, so these clusters go here, these clusters go here. And so one of them's like the outer limits, while one of them's like the inner side. Spirituality for me is the inside. One thing that I say with spirituality that I think really hinders it is this idea that it's kind of this very frou-frou, like for example, God or whatever, this existence of the universe is outside of us. You'll hear people talking about prayer. You'll hear people saying, give it up to the Lord, give it up to this other entity. And so you hear these other ideas, and what that does is that takes away the spirituality component. It takes away the connectedness from what I would call spirituality, right? So certain religions require you to pray to another entity, another higher power, something beyond you, which is actually just taking away from you. It's taking away the ability to connect, because you're giving all of this energy to another source. Same thing would happen with mental health, right? So if you give away your mental health source to somebody else, they're going to label you and tell you. It's like sometimes this happens in psychiatry or certain types of therapy where the person goes to the whoever, right, the psychiatrist, the therapist, and they're the ones that end up labeling you and telling you and guiding what's happening with you. This is the same principle that would happen when you go to some kind of religious cult or some kind of like religious community where they're telling you this is what you have to do. They're telling you this is how it works. This is what they don't work with you. And so something that you're seeing actually happen within the psychology and the spiritual community is more self-guided processes. So on psychology, you used to like pretty much go to the psychologist or the therapist or the psychiatrist, and they were going to tell you what was going on with you. They were going to be kind of like people, kind of like a priest in divinity. You know, you go to them and they're going to tell you everything that's going on with you. They're going to explain you from head to toe. You got to do this, this, and this. And so psychology used to be that same way. They had a system where you would go and then they were going to tell you how you were going to experience it, what was going to happen to you, what you should be doing, what you're like, literally, like they even did a study where they had people in a insane asylum, right, where they were literally picking apart their behaviors. They had not tested for anything, right? They had been previously tested before entering the program to see how psychiatrists would respond to them being in the program. And when they were in the program, everything they did just became a label for a diagnosis. Oh, they're in their journal because of this. So they're doing this behavior. So people that didn't previously have any mental health history were being put in asylums, and next thing you know, everything they were doing was being labeled as something. And so you see this phenomenon again happen with psychology and psychiatry, where previously people were like being told by these professionals what they had. That same phenomenon was happening within religious institutions where, again, the priest was the gatekeeper for divinity. And so you'd have to go to the priest to talk to God because you wouldn't talk to God on your own. It's like you didn't reach that level or you didn't reach that degree. Again, like this same kind of processes happening on both sides. So psychology, you were being pigeonholed, or you were being like blocked from understanding due to the circumstances of education or the barriers to entry. So again, being told what label you have. The same thing with divinity. They were telling you how to live, how to connect to God, what you had to do, and you had to go talk to these people to even get close to that divinity. When really, if you break down both these barriers, the real answer is within people. Even when you're in a psychological or any kind of psychiatry or therapy treatment, right? The treatment really has to do with the human experience. We even call it human experience or what is it called? Like there's a certain type of system that we use where humanistic, right? So we use like some kind of humanistic experience where we label the person as the main source of the information. So they are actually the one running the show. So a lot of the information is going to come from that person because they are the person that all the information of their mental health is coming from. They are the expert. So they know what's going on, which is the same thing with divinity. When you look at the person and they start to realize they have the answers within them, the more connected they become with the universe, right? So the more that they understand that they are the key to their own success, same thing with mental health, things start to make more sense for people. So when we give people back the power, they actually can unlock more of themselves than when you gatekeep information. So just remember that we need a big change in psychology and spirituality. They're more connected than not. So over time, let's see if we'll get back to a place where we understand that we are oneness with the universe. We're not separate. And the sooner we get to understanding that, the sooner that we're going to unlock our full potential as human beings. All right, guys, we'll talk soon. See you guys on the next one later. Hey, guys, this is Sebastian back with another video. And today I want to talk to you guys about breaking out of the mold, helping you understand that the people, the government, the agencies, family members, like a lot of these people, a lot of people we know have been manipulated by systems above them that they're not quite understanding. And this has created a big problem because people like we know, right? So let me give you guys an example of something that's really affecting our society, right? And it's a good example. There was an example of these monkeys who they had put in a enclosure, and they put a ladder in this enclosure. And what they did was they put bananas at the top of the ladder, okay? And what they wanted to do was see, how the monkeys would interact with the bananas. Well, obviously, the monkeys want to go get the bananas. And every time the monkeys would go up to get the food, they would spray all of them. Like, they would hose them all down. And so eventually they realized that every time somebody would try to go get the bananas, they'd all get hosed down. So they started hitting anybody who wanted to get up there. They started hitting them. Like, they started assaulting anybody who was trying to get up to that banana. So what ended up happening was, none of them would go up to get to the banana because they realized that. So what they wanted to figure out, if we take one of the monkeys out and put a new one in, right, what would happen? And so obviously the new monkey sees the bananas and is like, why is nobody getting it? Like, what the hell? So he ends up going up there, and what do? Boom, they beat him. Now, there's no more water spraying now. They're not spraying water anymore. At this point, they're letting the monkeys do the work for them. So all they had to do was condition them to have some kind of negative reaction to this event. And even though the new monkey never got sprayed down, doesn't understand why he's not allowed to get the bananas, but he just sees that everybody else is like not letting him get them. Like, there's something going on. And they can't communicate in the same way, right? Like, there's no written language or anything. So this has to do with muscle memory. And, this has to do with classical conditioning, as we call it. And classical conditioning is this idea that when you reward a behavior, it reinforces that behavior. Or when you punish a behavior, it creates an aversion to that behavior. So this idea that these monkeys, were conditioned to not want to get the banana, to not want to climb the ladder, as you could say, right? Literally, climb the ladder to get the reward. Any monkey that would join now automatically was taking on that old behavior, that old belief system, even though they had never been a part of that punishment. They had never been a part of that problem. They eventually got to a point where they replaced all the monkeys. So literally all the monkeys had been changed with a whole new set that had never been traumatized like the original group, yet they were all following the same exact social construct. So they were perpetuating this conditioned behavior onto new members of that society. And eventually they just started doing the same thing. They all started listening to an archaic law, essentially, that was passed down through behavior, through conditioning. And so if we take that example and we apply it to what we're going through now, it's very telling that we literally, that's how abuse works. And we know this. We know that when we limit people, we put them down, we prevent them from achieving certain things due to archaic rules. This is how it's always been. When we don't question what caused this conditioning, we just perpetuate it. And that's the difference between us and the monkeys, is that we have consciousness. We're able to question. We're beyond, right? We have a conscious state. So with that conscious state, we are able to ask. But, how many times do kids get conditioned from a very young age to stop asking questions? That's just how it's going to be. I'm going to give you a reason, to listen. And again, it's that archaic system, that abuse, putting down, hitting, humiliating, that keeps people from asking and wondering, why can't we get to those bananas? What's going on here? Even if that authoritarian-like type of system is no longer there, right? That abusive system is no longer in place. They're just perpetuating these issues. They're just perpetuating this trauma. And so again, it's important for people, and I want people to think, How are you involved in some way in one of these archaic systems where you have been passed down trauma, passed down some sort of behavior that you are perpetuating now, as far as like where you're at in your life and why you have certain limitations, why you may have created a cage in your own mind that's limiting the ability for you to fully grow and develop. So for me, it's important we take a look back at our history, our family history, our social history, right? All the different things, because again, time affects everything. Everything that you see around you has a history, has some sort of history. If you go back long enough, everything has history. Even the cells in your body go back long enough. They've been around. The cells in your body have been around since the beginning of, not the cells, but the atoms, essentially like every part that makes your body what it is has been around since the beginning of time. So we are all just these giant reflections of our entire history of life as time has just continued to move forward. You know, like time, like this liquid state that it is, has continued to evolve. We're a part of that process. And so we are literally a representation of all of our history, including the history of our ancestors and their laws and the things that whatever the history was of our ancestors, literally right now is impacting the way we're living. These archaic rules, these systems that have been in place, again, like the subservient nature that we have for like power classes and things like that. And the way if you think about it, the way we talk about history, where we always talk about how ignorant ancestors were, how dumb all their other cultures were. And that's the problem too, is that if you look at the way the system operates, it doesn't want us to remember like how humans used to live. It doesn't want us to remember we used to be connected with the spiritual realm, the ancestral realm. We used to have a deeper connection with nature, right? It's so interesting to me how often I'm around animals and they'll just start hanging out with me. They just come on. I have dogs that will literally, like while I'm walking in the road, that'll come and walk with me. And they just want to hang out. Because we used to be connected. We used to have a deeper bond. But I'll tell you another thing. There's another thing that affects us called learned helplessness. And it's learned helplessness because, again, you learn how to be helpless. You're not born helpless. Children are very go-getters. You learn to give that up. And so we got to remember that if we can learn helplessness, we can learn to be helpful. We can learn to help ourselves. So we want to be able to take into consideration what our power is and what we have the ability to do, because we're the mechanism for growth. That's why it's also called brainwashing, because they brainwash you. They change your conscious state, right? They're convincing you of your inability. They're trying to implement it in your mind that you're not able to do it, that you can't, so that you take away the power. You take away your own energy and effort. Remember this, change happened because of a consistent desire to want to be different, right? And so you're going to fail in that process. It's part of the process of growing. It's learning how to fail and it's learning how to push forward. That's going to change your reality. So guys, I just want to remind you, you are a byproduct of the human history, of your family's history, of this entire process. But that doesn't mean that you can't change for future generations. Changing your state of being so that the people that go after you can change the binds that are holding them down from becoming the best versions of their human selves. Like you guys know, I'm a believer in God, and I do believe that when you activate the human experience, the human body, the vessel, life makes a lot more sense. That's common sense. Remember, common sense is thoughts and feelings. Common sense. Alright guys, see you on the next one later. Hey guys, it's Sebastian back with another video, and today I want to talk to you guys about diagnosis, understanding a little bit about my philosophy in diagnosing, and really like understanding like why we diagnose, like what's the purpose behind it, some challenges behind it, just some good insight for you guys to have, so that if you get some support in mental health or you guys need some more, insight, you'll be able to kind of go in there with some kind of clarity on what the process is and why it's important. So a couple things about diagnosing. We use this tool as far as my license. I'm a marriage and family therapist. We use the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and right now it's on the 5th version. There's this thing called TR, which is like a revision, and so right now we're on the TR version, which is the revised version. It usually takes like the last 10 years of insight and get diagnostic criteria and feedback, and then implements it into the book that's already been there. And so a couple of things that I would say, my experiences, my philosophy on diagnosing. So as far as diagnosing goes, I do find diagnosing can be helpful in the sense that it gives us a base on where to refer people for ongoing support. So it just gives you a type of insight on the cluster of symptoms that you're experiencing that other human beings that have had similar symptoms have also experienced. And then it shows a collection of any kind of support, any kind of treatment modality. It just gives us a way to identify what's going on so that we can get you the right support, right? So I'm not opposed to diagnosing, right? I think that diagnosing, when it's used appropriately, as far as like looking for support and helping create some kind of clarity amongst clinicians or amongst medical staff, I think those are important. I think it also is important to be able to have a diagnosis. So when you're in places like a school environment, a work environment, or some of these more challenging social environments, you have the insight necessary to get the support that you need. And it has a evidence of different, things that might support that diagnosis. So you might have different interventions, different support groups, different types of environmental changes. So whatever it may be to support this needed diagnosis. This also gives people like teachers, providers, some kind of insight on what they're looking for, what they're looking at, to give them understanding on how to provide better care, right? Some people like to just believe in we should just focus on symptomology, which I do feel is an important part of it, right? We don't want to just focus on a diagnosis. It's not about the diagnosis, is just to help provide a type of kind of point of perspective, like a guiding light, like saying, hey, this is something we should be aware of so that we can keep giving it some kind of support, right? So the same thing, it's like, yeah, you might recognize all the symptoms of diabetes, but if you don't call it diabetes, it's kind of hard to give it the right support, right? So in my philosophy, diagnosing is appropriate. It's very helpful, especially to help people get the things that they need from their insurance providers, from their work environments, all kinds of different support networks, support things that might be out there to help people, again, get the needed support they deserve for whatever diagnosis they may have. Now in school, I recall they didn't really like us talking about diagnosis as much. This is what I remember when I was in school. So they were like, we want to focus more on the care we provide, not so much the diagnostic criteria. But I do feel this is an old school mentality. This is that idea that being labeled with sicknesses, being labeled with some kind of disability is like a negative towards, self-respect. I think there was generational trauma and people being afraid to be sick, people being afraid to be, recognized as something as less than like perfectly healthy or whatever. So there's a lot of stigma behind being diagnosed with something, as there's this old school mentality of you got to be perfectly healthy. You have to be like this, divine human being that has no health issues. But the problem is that when you have these fears or these concerns about getting a diagnosis, then people don't go to get the proper support and they stagnate their health and they only get worse. So for me, it's important for people to recognize, the benefit of having a disability, at least having a name for it, having an understanding of it. Just as much as you want to know that you have eczema and what is eczema, and to be able to look up the treatment solutions for eczema and then possible reasons for its existence, like maybe some possible causes, some support groups. So again, to me, diagnosing is not bad in the sense that it gives us a starting point. It gives us something, right? So what I would say about diagnosing, especially within my practice or clinical environment, it can be a challenge in the sense that sometimes it's hard for people to know what they're experiencing because they're new to mental health. Some of the words might be confusing.
I think that the actual statistical material can be confusing if you're not somebody that understands how to read this information. And so there might be questions that you might be asked that you may not understand and you may answer incorrectly because, again, the wording, the process might be confusing. So sometimes there's not great type of material in the sense of like questionnaires or some kind of assessment tool. Sometimes the assessment tools aren't that great. And that's something that I've realized too. It's like the DSM might have these, does this specify blah, 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 blah. But the assessment tools that we need to explore these things don't always have, I would say, the best information, or I would say they're not the best written, depending on your educational background, depending on your cultural background. There might be a lot of barriers in getting an effective diagnosis just because the process is a bit complicated. The other thing that you might find is there are some challenges within the medical system because there are these arbitrary rules that exist. For example, like if somebody's overdiagnosing something, they might get looked at differently, like, why are you overdiagnosing? But I also think that it's weird when we have these numbers, these statistics that exist, that it's, to me, I don't know, to me, all statistical information can be skewed to some extent. So if they say the prevalence rate of this is 10%, we haven't been able to explore the entire population. And I also find that there's a lack of insight and information in mental health in general. So for me, it's hard to believe some of these prevalence numbers. To me, what's more important is that the patient meets criteria, not so much that you have too much of a disorder. It's like, to me, that's like saying there was more COVID after 2019 than 2018. I mean, at some point, of course, the prevalence rate is going to change. I will also say that it's hard to know what prevalence rate is when you maybe have people that don't have the proper insider education to diagnose appropriately. So that's another problem. Sometimes there are barriers to things like owning a gun or getting into certain career positions. But I also would say if you have a mental health disorder that you're not supposed to be in that career field anyways, I mean, in it itself, it's probably important that maybe you should reconsider like what you're doing with your life, because if you're a danger, then really consider like, am I in danger? Like maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I shouldn't have a gun because we know that guns are usually used on their own person. Maybe you shouldn't have that job. Maybe you shouldn't do that because that could be a detriment to your life, right? So sometimes we have to make decisions because they might impact our future. So I do feel that diagnosing can be counterintuitive when it comes to some of the barriers that we may experience from having these. Another thing I would say about diagnosing, insurances want it. They want something on paper. They want you to have some kind of diagnosis. But what I will say is there's a lot of open-ended diagnosis. For example, like there'd be like unspecified anxiety or unspecified depression, where you meet some kind of criteria, but not enough to actually, merit a long-term disorder. So having little like things like that do help in kind of having some kind of way to diagnose people without having to completely dive into a full diagnosis. So just something to be aware of. Again, diagnosing isn't a bad thing. Getting a diagnosis isn't a bad thing necessarily. I am concerned a little bit about the way this established government is looking and exploring things like autism. I think there's a lot of information that is not known about these disorders, or at least not commonly known. So I think there's a lot of misinformation. So it does worry me when things like the government want to step in and intervene and diagnosis that they really don't have a lot of information on or not very educated on. So I would be careful about things like that, things being weaponized against you. So it can be challenging to get a diagnosis, not to get a diagnosis. Really, it's going to be up to you and what you want to do with it and how you want to use it. But again, I am for diagnosing when it's used for the appropriate reasons. All right, guys, I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.